going to conferences all the time is the main driver for progress in your skill set and also your relationship, and basically any professional can become a better professional by attending conferences.
It's not the standard, okay? It's a movie theater, but the visual is great and the sound is great, and I've seen a lot of room and space, and I think it's organized well.
Seeing all the people here today and they're excited about stuff, and you can see the energy and the desire to learn and do new things.
And I was positively surprised about the depth, the technical depth of the sessions, and how that makes the tester part of the team.
I think developers do benefit from coming to QA conferences, just the same as testers can benefit from going to dev conferences. You've got to have a broad understanding of what's going on.
It's really inclusive. I would say it's super diverse. People are really, really open and friendly, and it's really organized.
Conferences are well worthwhile for the ideas that they spark in people. When people come back to the office, they're full of ideas and they're all energized up.
Hello, TestCon Europe 2020. My name is Sammy, Kolluru. I'm talking to you from Toronto, Canada. I'm president of Imbus Canada Corporation. I have over 15 years of experience in Agile software development. Previously, I had worked for Dell, Eloqua, Oracle, some of the companies you may recognize. The increasing necessity of test automation results directly from the Agile Manifesto, which is response to changes over following a plan. Today, I will discover the response to changes with the aid of test automation in the Agile. So enjoy.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Sammy Kolluru. Today, we will be talking about test automation approach in the Agile world. Before I begin my session, we are going to make an assumption that you are all familiar with the Agile world, Agile projects. You either worked on them or you heard from somebody or you involved in those projects. So I'll make those assumptions. And today we're going to focus on how to introduce automation into your Agile projects. Okay, it's going to be a very interactive session. So we'll keep going, and finally I will answer any of your questions you might have at the end of the session. Okay, so before we go towards before we talk about the tools and approaches, why is automation? Why do you need to automate everything, right? So as we all know, in the Agile projects, we want to deliver the project, our software as soon as possible, which is a high quality software with a very short time frame. So given all this, automation plays a very significant role. So number one, we want to be a more efficient tester. We don't want to repeat the same thing over and over again. Rather, we want to become more efficient. That way, we will be more creative. At the same time, we are adding more value to our software. Number two is we want to build a better software. We want to build high quality software and also at the faster rate. So in order to achieve all these three aspects, to be efficient and also better software and to deliver the software faster, automation plays a very, very significant role. So how do I become better and faster in that case? As I said, we all know how the Agile projects work, so we understand them. So the question becomes, I know I play a role within the Agile projects. I'm one of the testing resource within the project. So how do I make my test better or even faster? So in order to answer this question, we have to ask ourselves three questions in this term. The first is, how do I find most defects in my project? Right, that is one of the goal. How I need to find as many defects as possible before my project goes live. And the second question would be, how do I make my test faster? And also at the same time, you want to make your test cheaper, right? You don't want to be very high maintenance testing approach. Rather, you want to make it faster. At the same time, you have to keep it very simple and cheaper. And what tools are there? What tools are useful for my test approach? So once we talk about faster and better software, we have these three questions that we have to address. So which we're going to address now during these sessions. The automation in the Agile project is not new. It is inbuilt within the Agile manifesto. If you all recall the manifesto, there are 4 of them, and the necessity of the test automation in the Agile projects actually comes directly from the Agile manifesto. If you all recall, the response to changes or following a plan is one of the manifesto in the one of the Agile manifesto. In this case, because we want to introduce our automation, rather than calling response to changes, I would like to call it a rapid response to changes, because as we all know, things changes very fast. There could be additional features, or they could remove the features, or they could modify the features. Regardless what happens, we want to respond to those changes rapidly. So we're going to make a small modification to our manifesto, calling it rapid response to changes over following a plan. So as I said, automation is not new to the Agile, but again, it is built right into the manifesto. So when we talk about our testing cycle, when we talk about our test efforts, what are one of the biggest challenges? We all know about this for somebody who worked on Agile projects. One of the biggest challenge we face is the regression test within your scrums, right? The test for regression test grows significantly with every iteration you have in your sprint. The more sprints you have, the more tests you're adding, the more features you're adding, more tests you're adding, hence your regression grows. So in these scenarios, we have 2 strategies that we can work with. The one is risk-based test, where you choose the high-risk areas and you execute them first. And the second approach we have is to be more efficient, that is to automate as much as possible. So given these 2 strategies, where the risk and the test automation, today we're going to focus on the automation. Let's see what the automation can help us to solve some of the regression issues. Um, when you make a decision for automating your test, there are some of the factors that affects your decision. Number one is the frequency. How frequently you want to execute your test. And the second would be the capability. Do you have enough capability within your resources? Do you have skills and tools available within your team? And the third factor that would help with the decision is the efforts, maintenance effort. How much maintenance can we afford them? Is there enough can you leverage your tools, and how much efforts you can introduce to maintain your test? So the frequency, the capability, and the maintenance effort will play a significant role in making the decisions for test automation. Now, whenever we talk about test automation, there are some myths that's going on. We all familiar with them. You heard them at some point in your career. The myth says automation finds more defects, which is not true. Automation test doesn't find more defects. It does find obvious defects at very fast rate. The defects that are known to us, because that is what anything that we know is what we're going to automate, and the defects are already known to us, or defects that we know are found within the area that we already know about. So automation test doesn't essentially find more defects. Rather, it finds the defects that are obvious to us. The second myth that goes around is that we can test we can automate all the tests, which is also a myth, because there's no way we can automate all the tests, because there are certain tests which involves human interactions, interventions. For example, you want to test some of the functionalities with the human emotions, or with the human behavior. How would customer interact with certain tools or certain software? So you cannot automate everything, but you can certainly automate most of the things that is known within our projects. And the third myth goes around is the automation test will make your manual test obsolete, which is also a myth, because as I said regarding my point 2, automation tests are good at finding known defects at a very faster phase, but it is not very useful to find some of those very creative defects, edge cases, or defects that are not known to us already. So, right? So in those cases, a manual intervention is necessary. So we just talking about all the three myths, now we understand that automation doesn't solve all the problems, but it will help you make your test more efficient. So given this myth, now what are the criteria? What should I automate then? If I have to consider my automating some of the tests, what are some of the criteria I need to keep in mind? Number one, regression. It always plays a very significant role. How frequently you want to run your test. So that always plays a significant role. Do you want to run every day, 24-hour cycle, or once a day, or once a week? So once you figure this, once you understand this criteria, your decision makes so much better. And the second one is, anything that's difficult to execute manually. So you want to consider to automate them. For example, any non-functional tests, which is very difficult to execute them manually by human interventions. For example, if you want to perform a load or performance test, you cannot have thousands of users executing the test at any given instance. So in those type of difficult to execute manually scenarios, we want to, of course, consider the automation. And the third criteria you want to consider is the test execution. How fast you want to execute your test, especially given your sprint is very small. It could be anywhere between 1 week all the way till 4 weeks. So given that shorter sprint cycle, you want to execute your test faster. So these are some of the criteria that you may want to consider if you decide introducing automation into your Agile test. What can you automate? Of course, you can automate any test that is possibly that could be automatable. For example, you can automate the functional test, such as a smoke test or API path test or a high risk area test. So any functional test can be automated. At the same time, non-functional test also can be automated. For example, load test or performance or reliability test. So both functional or non-functional test can be automated, and from my point of view, they both should be automated to as much as possible, so to make your test more efficient. um, Whenever we talk about the automation, introducing automation into your Agile projects, we talk about test quadrants. The quadrants helps us to make a decision what type of test we need to do, and are we going to automate them or not automate them? And also, to some extent, it will also help us to decide what type of tools I can use to automate my test. So let's go through these quadrants and see how it can help us decide, help with our decision making process. Um, we all know by now, for those who has been working in the QA, regardless of what methodology you use, we understand that systematic test finds defects in a most reliable way, and also systematic test will help you find reproduce the defects consistently, right? So also, regardless of from this quadrant, regardless of what approach you're going to decide, whether it's going to be manual or automated, or some manual, some automated, any decision has to be added to your definition of done in order to make those decisions. So as I said, the quadrant, we have 4 quadrants, which helps us with our decision making process. The first quadrant, I'm going to put the laser. The first quadrant is if you're talking about the technology facing aspect of your software, and if it's supporting your team, especially your development team, then the things that you automate, your regression, the unit testing, or component testing, or integration testing. So these type of tests, you certainly want to automate them. So that way it become more efficient and more effective. Um, for those aspect where it's a business facing, if your software is a business facing aspect, and also it will support your team, especially the testing resources within your team, some certain tests, such as any functional test you might execute, or story test, or simulations, prototypes, these type of tests you can execute them manually, and we all executed them manually, and also to some extent you can also automate them. So both manual and automation would be a better approach for any kind of business facing aspects of your software. How about the business facing aspect of your software, but it will critique the product. That will criticize how good the product is, how well it could meet your customer's expectation. The tests such as use scenario-based testing, user acceptability, usability testing, or user acceptance testing. So these type of testing, you need some kind of manual interventions. You need to introduce human emotions or human behavior while testing, while critiquing your product. So these type of tests typically done outside the QA environment. Somebody within your sprint team. So these type of tests most likely should be executed manually, just because you want to introduce that human emotions and human behavior while using the software. And the fourth quadrant says, if you're critiquing the product from a technology point of view, for example, any kind of function, performance testing, load testing, security testing, in these type of tests, you may not be able to execute them manually. So you may want to utilize tools that might be available that could help you achieve some of your performance goals or security goals or load test goals, right? So this quadrant will help us decide what quadrant we are in, or what type of test we may also perform, and also at the same time it will tell you whether you want to do it manually, or also do you want to do automation. Let's go through some examples. What are some of the tests you want to automate? You want to automate anything structure-based testing, interface testing, or workflow testing. These are typically done by a development team, but certainly those things has to be automated. How about from the testing resources point of view? For example, the session-based testing, the black box techniques such as equivalence, boundary value, decision tables, behavior-driven testing. So those tests you can both automate and also you can do manually. How about user acceptance testing, such as acceptance criteria, performing exploratory testing, performing usability testing, or even the pilot run? In those cases, you want to automate those type of tests manually. Then if you want to perform a load test or endurance test, stress testing, security testing, in those tests, you may want to use tools that might be available to benefit your testing approach. So let's talk about tools then. So what are some of the tools that might be available? For automation, especially from a development point of view, there are a number of tools available, such as unit framework, JUnit, TestNG, or RSpec. These are some of the tools that development team might use to automate some of their tasks. How about from a testing aspect? There are a number of tools available. They're both open source tool or proprietary tools. For example, you want to automate the behavior-driven test framework, such as Cucumber, or keyword-driven framework, such as Robot Framework and Selenium, or a model-based test such as Tediso. So these are a number of tools. There are a number of tools available, but these are some of the examples where you can use them to make your decisions in tool selections. How about from a manual intervention point of view? Again, there are keyword-based tests available, such as Fitness or Test Bench. Those are the tools available that will help you with introducing a human emotions in your test. How about tools that could help with your performance and loads and security? Of course, there are tools available such as JMeter, Load Runner, and also for security tests, Burp Suites. So these are some of the tools, those are available in making those decisions. Regardless of what tools we select, regardless of what decision you decide, those should all add it to the definition of test as well. So that way you determine what tool you're going to use and when. So when we talk about the framework, what framework works best for your decision-making process? There are a number of tools available, number of tools has its own approaches. Here on the screen, you see different approaches and its own maturity levels. Depending on this decision is not solely made by one person or one team. Most likely, it would be a collaborative decision that has to be made within your team or within your organization itself. So, regardless of what the decision your team makes, depending on the resource available, it depends on the efforts that you can spend on your project. You make a decision on what approach is best for your team. For example, you can you can choose an approach that is a record and playback or a capture and playback, which is one of the simplest approach. But the issue here is, even though it's very simple to test, but it may not be highly customizable, and also it may not be easily maintainable. So you have to keep that in mind. Second approach available is script programming. Again, this approach is also very commonly used, especially now. Again, if you want to have a script programming, it is maintainable. You can maintain them, but again, you have to consider that you need somebody who's technically highly skilled in certain programming language, somebody who's as much equal to the developer in the team. And also the maintenance efforts could be very high as well. The other approach available is a data-driven test, which is much more better than the script programming, where your test is driven by the data that's available. It is very easy to maintain them, and also it's very easy to share within your organizations, and also the maintenance and also the customization might be aspect that you want to consider them. Keyword driven test, which is one of my favorite to execute them, which is much more sophisticated. You can customize them. You can run as many tests as you want on a very short cycle. Again, the efforts, it definitely takes a lot of efforts into maintaining those tests. Framework-based testing is also one of the common one, which is if you can introduce a framework-based approach, that is even better, because it is easily maintainable. But it is highly sophisticated. You can introduce any type of test you may want to you want to achieve, depending on the goals. Again, keep in mind the cost factor and the available resources factor. So regardless of what approach you're going to choose, you have to make a decision whether you're going to go with a simplistic test where you can just record and playback, all the way until framework-based automation, where you're going to automate everything very sophisticated, keeping in mind the cost and also the maintenance efforts. Okay, so once we understand this approach, now the decision is, which one do I choose them, right? So there are, depending, as I said, depending on the maturity level of your organization, of your team, you decide what approach is best for your to achieve the goal of your projects. For example, if you do decide go with the capture and playback approach, as I said earlier, it is simple. It could be cost effective. The problem is, it may not be easily maintainable. The tests are not robust. And also, you may not be able to share across teams. So those are some of the challenges you have to keep in mind. If you want to go with the data-driven approach, again, it is simple. It could be cost effective. To some extent, you can also share them, but again, the maintenance and the robustness of your test may not be as great as other approaches that I'm going to talk about. Right? Again, you have to keep those in mind when you make those decisions. Keyword-driven approach, as I said, one of my favorite, which is simple to execute, as long as you understand some of the keyword libraries that you can use them over and over again. It may not be cost effective, because you need to have a dedicated resources who can maintain those tests, but it is easily maintainable, and also the test can be robust, and also those tests can be shared across a team, across multiple Scrum team within your organizations. The model-based approach is another approach that's available, the framework-based approach, which is not simple. As I said, it is very sophisticated. You need a dedicated resource with all the skills that is necessary in order to automate your framework. It may not be a cost-effective, but huge benefit is it is a robust, it is easily maintainable by the resource that is available in your team, and also you can run the test independently, or also you can also share within your organization. So depending on the maturity level of your organization, you decide what approach is best for your team. Okay, I believe this slide will give you little insight on what approach you might want to you might want to introduce into your testing process in your team. The goal is to have an efficient automation. Um, so when you are thinking about automation, when you say when your maintenance efforts is very high, higher than what you could estimate them, whenever there is changes to your software or the software that is under test, whenever there is any changes and you have to maintain them consistently, that tells you that your organization is immature and they in terms of introducing automation, or your automation approach itself might be immature. So you have to keep that in mind. And also, if you're creating a test which is taking longer time, you are taking longer duration to create those tests or run those tests, again that is an indicator that your automation approach might be mature, right? So what are some of the best practice in that case? The best practice would be to introduce keyword driven, because you're reusing the libraries as much as possible, which is widely available. And also the data driven testing might be a greater approach. Having control over your test automation is also one of the greater best practice that you may have to follow. Have a consistent test environment which is consistent throughout your projects, and also the platform that you're working on. And also the detecting the object, rather than detecting the object based on the names or labels, detecting the object based on the unique identifier could be a best practice, right? So keep in mind, when you want to introduce automation into your projects, you have to look at how mature your organization, how mature your team is, and also consider some of the best practices that could help you make those decisions. Non-stop testing is also one of the aspect of automation. Testing within an agile team, and coordination between your development team and the testing team is very, very important. So how do we coordinate them? How can a tester and developer can ensure that you can have a non-stop build cycle, 24-hour build cycle? In order to achieve them, we have to have a very high coordination. For example, your developer can work on a unit test, can build a unit test based on the test first approach, and your testing team can review them to ensure that the unit test covers all the aspects of the story, while your test team are specifying the system test for entire the story at the story level, or at the sprint level. Your developer team can help with reviewing those system tests to ensure that you capture all the scenarios that is possibly could be captured. While your developers are coding them until all the tests are passed, because they're running the unit testing, while your developers are coding them, as a testing resources, you can automate all the system tests within for any given sprint. And your developers, to some extent, can also participate in automating some of the system tests, or they can provide additional resource for your system test, while your developer is working on coordinating automating some of the system tests. As a test resources, you can execute them, all those system tests, and to ensure that the system test is passing, or if it's not passing, let the introduce to a developer so they can fix those defects, and also they can rerun those unit tests. While very important is, while you as a test resources, you can spend the additional time available on doing exploratory testing, because exploratory testing is one of the highly effective tests within your agile projects. And also development team, the test team can also perform the retesting to ensure that all the bugs has been fixed, and all the regression test has passed. And by now you would have automated all the regression tests and ensure that those are passed, and then you can add it to the done. So done You finished a project, you're happy, everyone is, the project is good to go. So once you have this coordination between the development and cycle, your testing will become non-stop. So your developers helping testers, testing helping development resources. Again, I keep saying developer and tester, but we all know in Agile, we don't call them as a developer and tester, but for convenience sake, we're going to differentiate these roles so that we understand what are some of the roles performed by developers as well as testers. We all know the test progress, right? The test progress, you start with the planning, you do analysis and design, implementation, executing your test reporting, and also some closure activities. There are a number of, it takes certain efforts. For example, planning and control, it might take about 6% of your efforts. Look at the designing your test all the way till executing your test and reporting. It takes about 92% of your efforts. That takes most efforts. So this could be a very good case where you want to automate them as much as possible. There might be 2% of the efforts you might spend in archiving or versioning, but 92% of the efforts are spent on defining a test, tracing the requirements, writing the scripts and executing the test and logging the test. So can we automate them? Of course we can. For example, the number of approaches available for planning and control. You can think about test management, any kind of test management tools that could help you achieve the goal for planning and scheduling. For analysis and design, model-based test approach or test sequencer for scheduling a test is a very good approach. For execution, or roboter test execution tools that could be a very highly effective approach where you can write a script and run your test on the environment and log a defects. For reporting purpose, defect management tools are very, very effective in reporting the issues and also generating the report for decision making. And for version management is of course is necessary to manage different versions of your software at any given cycle within your sprint. So some of the positive effects of using the tool is, of course, as we've been talking about, is automation. It helps you accelerate your test, and also it will make your test more effective and faster. And also, it is a relief to your testing results. Your testing results, rather than testing the mundane activity or repeatable activity, if they can automate those repeatable activities, then they're relieved to perform other creative activities, creative tests. They can think about different scenarios. And also, it is a big motivation for the testing resources to automate most of the tests. That way, they're using the creative aspect of their approach for testing the project. Automation also helps with the functionalities. Any functionality that cannot be executed manually, for example, the load and performance. So in those scenarios, you want to get automated them. So that is one of the positive effects for introducing automation into your sprint. And also the reminder, for example, documentations, how many tests has been executed, are they reproducible? So in those type of scenarios, automation tools could be very effective. Communication, which is the one of the biggest aspect of using a tool, or it helps with communication. For example, did you execute all the tests, or did you execute certain percentage of the test, and what are the dispersions within your test? So those communications are highly efficient in order to make a quick decision within your short sprint cycle. So you need to introduce some kind of tools, and the tools has its positive effects. Automation, functionality, reminder, and also the biggest one is the communications. So if you're thinking about introducing a tool, the first thing would be to look at the impediments. What are my impediments? What are some of the challenges? Based on the challenges, you want to propose some of the solutions. Preferably, the solutions would be tools that you can address some of those impediments. Once you define the tools, then you have to think about the criteria. What are the criteria that you may want to address? What are some of the goals you have in order to deliver the projects? Once you have the criteria, experiment them, try them on a smaller project, see how it works, and then based on the results from the smaller projects, make a decision whether you want to implement the tool or whether you want to customize them or even take a brand new approach. Once you experiment them and once you've made a decision, then integrate within your team charters. That way your entire Scrum team can use them. And also keep in mind, maintenance efforts, right? That has to be addressed, and preferably the maintenance efforts, regardless of what tool you might decide on, maintenance effort has to be added to your estimation, and also preferably with your Scrum Master involved in those decisions. So general criteria, if you're thinking about tools, is a scalability is a one of the I factor. Depends on how big your software is, how many users are going to use your software. So scalability plays a very big role in your decision factor, and also portability. Some of the criteria that you can keep in mind when you decide the tools for your organization. How many platforms can it support? How many versions can it support? How about geolocations? Is your software supported in multiple locations, and can the tools help to test all those geolocations? Operability, maintainability is very, very important. Support. Nowadays, support is also very important, because you need to have a necessary training in order to use the tools. How frequently they update the software, how frequently they update some of the issues that you might report to them. About the training materials, so those are very, very important. And also integratability. Does it support the different technical platforms? About APIs, interface between your applications. So these are some of the criteria you may have to keep in mind when you're making a decision for the tools. Some criteria for test management tool. If you decide, hey, we want to introduce some test management tool, the first question you would ask is, do you really need one? Because you're working Agile, you have to be quick and efficient. If you do decide that, yes, we do need a test management tool rather than using the Agile project management tool, some of the criteria you might want to keep in mind is the backlog. Can it do traceability between your stories, epics, between your test, and also estimation? Can it assist with the effort estimation for each of the stories? Task board, does it have a display task board that shows the status of each of your stories, or can you assign them to a owner? Can you manage your test? Can you manage your test versions, results, and can you have a different version controls? Can you integrate with your version control management tools? How about reporting, burn down charts? Can it be visible to all the stakeholders within your team? So these are some of the criteria you may want to consider if you want to introduce the test management tool. If you want to introduce a defect management tool, which is very important from my point of view, again, the decision is, do you really need one, or can you use your existing tools that's available? If the decision is yes, we need to have a dedicated defect management tool. In those cases, again, we have to consider the backlog, right? Can you trace between stories and your tests, and also all the way till the defects? Task board, can you have a status of the different defects available? Artifacts, can you have an attachment? Can you add stack traces to your defects? Or analysis, can you have a progression of those defects that you find them? Progression within the sprint. We call them defect life cycle. Can you showcase those progressions, and can you have it distributed between number of teams, or between a scrum of scrum teams? And also role models. Can each member of your scrum team, can they have a different roles, different the rights in order to use those tools? Not everyone have the same privilege, so different roles can have a different privilege in order to use the tools. And also the notification, if there's any new defects found or any new defects has been resolved, can it send a notifications to the concerned stakeholders? So these are some of the criteria you have to keep in mind when you make a decision on defect management tool. Automation tool, very important. If you want to decide on what tools you want to introduce, you have to consider the points of control. Can it support the GUI? Can it support the API or database? And also programming. Are you going to consider the record and playback approach, or you want to introduce a script programming approach, or do you want to use a standard library based on the keyword driven test? So this will help with the decision making process if you consider these criteria. And also process, can you have a distributed test? Can you schedule those tests? Can you run those tests unattended? So this is the process plays a very significant role, because you want to achieve the 24-hour life cycle. And also logging logging. Can you record screenshots? Can you record log files? So that way that can help developers, do a issue, fix those issues that they can find them, debug those issues, right? Here are some of the milestone that you have to consider. Agreement, everyone in the team should be agreed, including the product owner. Uniformity, every team member should use the same project throughout the Scrum, and also from Scrum to Scrum projects, they have to be uniformity, and also regularly monitor the use and also do the planning, right? Ensure that there is a efforts introduced for planning and also for training measures. So agreement, uniformity, and the usefulness are some of the milestones that you want to consider them. So that's about my time. Thank you everyone for attending today's session. It has been a very informative session. I hope based on these discussions that we are having, I'm hoping that this will help you decide on if you want to introduce a test automation, and also it will help you to decide what tools that could help them. So I'm going to go on the Sildo to look at some of the questions and try to answer them as much as possible. So which test management tools are available for a large projects? There are a number of test management tools. You can pretty much do a research on the Google. I do not want to endorse any specific tool, but the number of tools that is available for managing test for any large projects. Microsoft is very active on building some of their own the Azure cloud applications to manage some of the enterprise level tests, and also Jira has been progressing over time, all the way from uh, managing tests for a smaller projects. Now they support all the way up to the enterprise level projects. So there is no one tool. There are a number of tools available. It depends on the criteria what makes best for your projects. The best approach here to decide on the test management tool is talk within your team members, within your Scrum team, preferably with your product owner, because they will also be involved in some level, and also your sprint team, the Scrum Masters, and make a decision some of the criteria. What are some of the criteria? Once you establish those criteria, that will help you decide what tool meets those criteria. I would strongly encourage you to make some research available online, but I named some of them. Again, as I said, I'm not endorsing any tools, but tons and tons available. Let's see the next question. Advantage of disadvantage of integrating with a test management tool. Advantage, of course, is the test management. The number one biggest advantage is the progression. So if you integrate the test management tool within an organization, so that will help the decision making process for not only the testing resources and the development resources, and also it's a decision making process for your entire project team. So there are a number of advantages available, especially in terms of decision making, in terms of the reporting, in terms of the availability of visualization of those reports. If you do not have a tool, the test management tool, then you will spend most of the efforts on doing some of the mundane manual activities. Rather, if you manage them with your the test management tool, they help you tremendously, especially if you are working in a Scrum of Scrum, that is multiple teams. And also the disadvantage could be, again, the maintenance. Number one, everyone has to agree to use the same tool. There could be some who loves the tool, some they may not like the tool, but you have to be in agreement. And also maintenance, you have to it may require maintenance periodically to archive tests that may not be valid anymore, or to prioritize some of the tests. So maintenance might be some of the disadvantages, but the advantages uh, uh, takes over all the disadvantages of using test management tool, especially if you're working in a shorter sprint cycle. All right, so that is end of my time for today. I will log in on the Zoom and I'll take a couple of questions on the Zoom as well. Thank you everyone for today's session, and I hope to see you around. Goodbye.